Welcome to our Conversations with Sound Artists podcast. This is a collaboration of the Dolby Institute and the Soundworks Collection. My name is Glenn Kaiser. I'm the director of the Dolby Institute, and we have something special for you today. This is the last in our special series of conversations about directors and their collaborations with their sound teams. And this is a recording of a conversation that we had at the Tribeca Film Festival a while back with the composer Carter Burwell and the sound designer Skip Livesay about their pretty remarkable collaboration with the Coen brothers. They both started their careers really working with the Coen brothers on their very first film, Blood Simple, in 1985, and have continued working with the Coens all the way through their last film. So this is a recording of a conversation that we had in front of a live audience in New York City as part of the Tribeca Film Festival Masterclass series. So enjoy it. So the story of how you guys started in the industry almost parallels how you started with the Coen brothers, right? This was, the Blood Simple was your first movie, is that right, Carter?
Yes.
All at the same time.
Yep.
How did you guys get involved with the Coens in the first place?
My friend Mark Silverman was the line producer, and I was working in the Brill building, in the Film Center building, and we worked on some projects together. And he said, "Well, I worked on this movie in Texas, and they need a sound editor. Would you be interested?" And I said, "Of course, fantastic." And I agreed to do it for the money that they had. I think that's why I got the job. It was their first film, and they didn't know any better, so they hired me right away. And after a while, when it came time, after a year, really, we started working on getting ready to mix, and they said, "Who are we going to get to do the score?" And I said, "Well, I know this guy Carter. He's really fantastic. I don't know if he's ever done a movie score, but he's a great guy. I think you should meet him." And
Because you guys knew each other from the music scene,
some music,
right?
yeah.
Right, yeah, from the New York, as always, had a music scene in the 80s, which we were, a part, late 70s, early 80s. Yeah, and Skip and I knew each other from bands playing in places like CBGB's, Mud Club. Yeah, my conversation was very much like Skip's. They didn't know any better, so they ended up hiring me. Although I think they did, we were talking about it backstage, they did actually hire someone else first. And
Well, hang on. You got the job, and then you said, "Well, I can't really do it right now." And then they hired another composer
oh, okay.
because you were going away.
Right, so I went to Manchester in England to work on an album, and then towards the end of that, they called and they asked if I could still, come back.
Do you know what
and do it.
happened?
No.
Well, the other composer went into the stage to do the final output. He had done it all on computer, and he had erased the cues.
Joel said something like that to me, but I didn't know if there was a story. That's really
So
true.
Carter, we got to get Carter. So I don't know if that panic was in their voice when they called you the second time, but that's...
This is a good tip to you composers out there. Don't erase
Don't
all
erase.
the music, at the mix.
So was it a situation where you didn't know what you didn't know, and so it just kind of worked? Or how did you, for your first film, what was your approach to doing the score?
Well, you have to remember that it was also their first film. So when I met them, they were kids out of college, just as I was, who didn't know what they were doing. Of course, now in retrospect, we all knew what we were
the
doing.
genius was there.
There was an inevitability to it.
We
right?
could tell the genius was there.
No, but we really, when I looked at a reel, they showed me a reel of a rough cut of this film,
Very long film.
Very long film during which a lot doesn't happen, for long stretches. Yeah, I had no way of telling that anyone would ever see it. And in fact, they were quite honest with me, saying the odds that anyone will ever see this are low. And since all my money was deferred payments in case it got distributed, as I say, they were very honest. They are to this day very honest about the money they have and with the possibilities of things being profitable. They're low. And in that film, they said it was virtually impossible. And I remember, even after they completed it, I think they got distribution in South Africa and nowhere else for a year until Toronto picked it up and then New York Film Festival picked it up. And then people started thinking that instead of like a sort of roughly made long film, it was actually a tense, taut, film noir.
Right. So what's the process for both of you for working with Joel and Ethan? At what point in the process do you guys typically get involved?
Well, we're doing one now. They're making a film now, and we're going to go in and spot with them in a couple of days. And we're going to go through the whole film and talk about all the things sound-wise that are going to happen in the film. Some things are very obvious. A lot of things we have to completely make up, including pretty much all of what Carter's doing. You haven't done any preliminary work for the film.
No.
Do you guys read the scripts before they go shoot, or?
Yeah.
We do, but that's a courtesy.
You don't,
really.
you
They
don't,
have-
you don't give
they-
them, you don't give them script notes,
No.
is what I'm saying, right?
That's for fun. And it does, sometimes I know for my part, it does help to have read the script and at least discuss, are we talking about a big orchestra, 4 instruments? It helps with the budget and things like that to have those kinds of discussions. But it's usually obvious. I mean, this film, it's obvious that it's big.
It's a musical comedy.
Yeah, it's a music comedy. It takes place on a Hollywood backlot, so you pass through all these films that are in production, and there's a tap dance number, and there's an Esther Williams water ballet number, and there's
There's a submarine.
Yeah, there's
There's a cowboy.
Are you guys supposed to be saying all this stuff?
Oh, it's public knowledge, right?
I think and it is now. Anyway, so that we typically spot when there's a cut of the film.
Right.
And spotting is where we go through the film from beginning to end and talk about what should be happening sonically, musically in the scenes. And it is not typically done, the composer and sound designer spot the film together, but it's a smart thing that I would recommend everyone do, because if you don't, as I say, which is much more normal, at the final mix, you've got someone trying to push in these sound effects, someone else trying to push in the music. It's if it hasn't been planned, it's just a situation for a fist fight.
Yeah, it's more like a free-for-all, under most circumstances, most movies that we work on, where we don't know the composer. I've had the pleasure of working with a bunch of composers, not nearly for as long as closely as we've worked together, but I'm a huge fan of the music part of the business. And now I've been mixing for the last long time, I don't know, 10 or 15 years. So now I mix the music as well. So I have to pay attention to what's happening on that side. It's not just the talking and those music guys over there, which is the way it is like that very commonly.
You can't be precious with the sound effects because you're also responsible for the music on the mixing board.
Even more so, I don't mix the sound effects anymore.
Right.
I mix the dialogue and the music.
So you supervise the sound effects and you do sound design, and then you hand that off to another mixer on the stage. That's an interesting. So I can't emphasize to you guys enough how rare in our business this way of working is, because I've been on so many mixing stages where it's just it's a train wreck between.
Sorry.
And it's
That's not
often unhappy too. And
Yeah.
it's quite a precious process. It takes a lot of time and money to produce all the material. And people generally work in a vacuum, basically. It's not uncommon for the film score to be composed and recorded and mixed without listening to any of the other stuff that's going.
That's absolutely right.
Yeah.
And I remember when sound went digital, everyone was very excited that you could just have all the faders up. It was technically possible to do that. And I still hear a lot of very noisy mixes where they, basically someone has decided not to decide what should be featured. But if instead you can, before it's even done, decide, okay, this is a music moment, this is a sound moment, or Skip and I will do things where I'll give him the high frequencies and I take the low frequencies, or things like that. Or we pitch our work together on No Country for Old Men. We'll discuss that, I guess. But finding this so that his wind sounds match the pitch of the music and vice versa. So it's I think it's very exciting, and but it is not commonly done.
Right. So you guys actually spot the film together with Joel and Ethan, and then you're handing stuff back and forth to each other as you go through the process?
Where we think it's relevant, yeah.
Well, one of the reasons I picked that Raising Arizona clip also to me is kind of genius filmmaking. But I'm curious about, it's not unusual in your work with the Coens to have not necessarily a very long musical cue, but you'll have a piece of music that will come and go. So, it'll come in for a moment and then step back, and then you might have this cacophony with that, I love that tone for the dogs, that rumble of, whenever the dogs appear. So and to me, that you guys were doing this from the very beginning, which is deciding who was going to step forward and who was going to step back. How did that organic kind of collaboration start?
I would say that we have a motivational speaker that we work with, Joel and Ethan Cohen. So the thundering horde is what they called the dog sound. So like they wanted the sound of a stampeding herd of elephants, and so they know that. In fact, may even be in the script.
Right. As you said, I mean, they write knowing the importance of the sound and the music, and they put space in their films for that, when a lot of people don't. But they feel free to have a few minutes when there might not be any dialogue, like what you just saw.
Right.
That the sound is all effects and music there, occasional word, here and there. But a lot of people would be uncomfortable having pages of script with no dialogue. But they understand what will be there in the end, or at least they have some faith that it'll
That's
be.
especially rare for writer directors to have significant chunks of the movie with no dialogue.
Imagination.
No, just no dialogue for a chunk. It skips and all. He teases me constantly about this sort of stuff. But
Well, it is worth pointing out that in Raising Arizona, the everything with a car was shot MOS. So if you watch the film, there are whole grand long sequences like that one where there was no sound recorded.
because it was shot very speed, or what was it MOS?
It's cheaper, faster. I don't know.
We're not going to bother with sound during production just because we need to go fast.
The guy who was a mixer was a golfer, so he played golf on the days when they had cars.
Well, and I was actually on the set when they were shooting that in Scottsdale, and I mean they first of all, I'd like to say you have to take your hat off to anyone who for their second film wants to work with babies and dogs, but they
Right.
On the set every dog in the neighborhood is barking, right? You can't have 3 dogs in the street without every dog in the neighborhood barking. So it was the middle of the night, but it was not quiet. It was
So everything is constructed in that
So
sense,
everything's
basically what you're
constructed,
saying.
We went to the first screening. I don't know if we were there, but in those days, a screening was basically reserved for the filmmakers. There was no marketing screenings in those days. And so they would run whatever they had, which in this case was the dialogue track, and there may have been one music track, and nothing else. So we sat in a screening and we watched these sequences. Every time the car came on screen, quiet, silence. Totally silent, all these chase scenes, things happening, motorcycles, all this stuff, completely silent. And eventually Joel would go,
Well, our next clip is from Miller's Crossing, which is one of my favorites, and it's the scene when Tommy, who's played by Gabriel Byrne, takes John Turturro out to the woods at Miller's Crossing to bump him off. So let's see what happens. I'll flatter Carter for a moment by saying it's happened to me numerous times that I'll be sitting in a movie that might have main credits at the end, and midway through the movie I'll suspect I think I know who wrote the music for this, but that doesn't happen with your tracks. They seem to very perfectly sit with whatever the needs of the film are. I wanted to ask you about the instrumentation. Obviously, this was radically different from what we had just seen from Raising Arizona, which was their very next film. How do you, when you're thinking about and working with a new film, how do you decide what the vocabulary of the instrumentation is going to be?
Well, it's ideally the music and by extension the instrumentation is somewhat part of the world of the film. Ideally, it would be true that they are all, as you say, just completely a world unto themselves. That would be my ideal. It's of course not that way in reality, but as much as possible, that's what I would like to do. In this case, I had never done an orchestral score. I didn't, I'm not a trained composer or a trained musician, so I don't know anything. At the point at which Joel and Ethan, it was their idea that it'd be orchestral. They thought with the look of the film, the big coats and the hat, and the way that the film, echoes an older style of filmmaking. They wanted an orchestral score. They wanted the lushness of that. And they knew perfectly well I knew nothing about how to do that. And honestly, anybody else would have gone and hired someone who knew what they were doing. But of course, if they were going to do that, I would never have gotten Blood Simple either. You know, my wife thinks that, you know, the reason that they keep hiring me is because they just hate meeting new people. And but it's also possible
There may be an element of truth to that.
Yeah, that's right. But yeah, so for some reason, yeah, they knew I didn't know how to do it, and they gave me 3 months, which is in this business is a long time, to figure it out, like come up with themes, sketch them out with synthesizers, and find an orchestrator who does know how to work with the orchestra, find engineers who know how to record the orchestra. Like this, in a way, was our first real, you know, film, in the sense that we were stepping into a tradition of film music that that we had managed to avoid by just having a banjo player, or on Blood Simple, just me playing piano, things like that.
And stylistically, I mean, visually, and in terms of sound effects, the two movies could not be more different from each other.
Right. So we were, you know, we were all learning a lot, all at the same time.
That's remarkable to me because the work all seems so self-assured, which is just amazing. Can you talk a little bit about designing and building the palette of sounds for the woods?
Yeah, that was one of the key sounds of the whole film, was the sound of the creaking trees, and that we had to have something. So a lot of times when you want to emphasize that it's really, really quiet, you start by turning off the air conditioning. And then you have something that's not very loud that you can clearly hear, and that makes you think, wow, I can hear the trees creaking. Geez, it must be very quiet here. So then you can speak up when the air conditioning comes on. I'm just kidding.
I'm
No
certain
worries.
that this is a THX rated
No.
cinema, by the way.
THX air conditioning. So a lot of it was about hitting these key sounds. And again, I'm pretty sure that was in the script, or at least it was very clear in the script that they were in an isolated place where things would echo, and even at the distance, however far the car was, they could clearly hear the gunshot and know that the deed was done, and that was a crucial part. And cinematically, you wanted to sort of have the reverberating sound of the forest as a reinforcement for the fact that he puts in the 2 shots. So we sort of spun that into thunderous echo, and that is kind of a natural version of a sound that you hear echoing around the space. So we added that kind of thunder, rolling thunder to the gunshots. Those were the kind of things that we needed to do to make our gigantic orchestra of sound effects work. We had basically the same call that Carter had, which was up your game and do something special. And we also had period cars. It was a lot of fun to do. We recorded out in Ohio, and on a very cold day. We had machine guns and all kinds of fun stuff, and it was really, there was a lot of stuff to dig into, but it was really just about doing the hard work that has been done, you know, since the talkies, of finding really cool sounds to put in the movie. And even though not many films had been made like this one in New York, we were still able to go places like Ohio and record cars and do the things that they'd been doing in Hollywood the whole time.
One of the things that, I mean, there again, so many scenes I could have picked for this. I love the Tommy gun, Danny Boy sequence from Miller's Crossing. But I wanted to ask you, Carter, about one of the things that I think is true of the Coen Brothers movies is that they often have a very interesting combination of source music or indigenous music to the period with the score. So can you talk a little bit about, I'm thinking also like the Beethoven sonatas and Man Who Wasn't There, or some of the other, the hymns from True Grit. At what point does that become part of the palette, and how do you work with that material?
Well, in each case, honestly, it's different in every film. In this one, they showed me the film with no music at all, and the film is especially seen in that way. It's quite brutal. There's people, Gabriel Byrne's getting kicked in the head in every other scene. You know, it's
Poor
very.
Gabriel Byrne, just, I mean, he gets the shit kicked out of him.
Still looks great,
I mean, right,
but
yeah,
he's.
absolutely.
You know, I wish I could look that good after I've been kicked in the head. But it was quite brutal and cold, and I felt that for me, after having read the script, I felt that, well, you know, what's driving this story in a way really is the love between Gabriel Byrne's character and Albert Finney's character. He's the head of the gang that Byrne is in. That it's like a love story, and then Gabriel Byrne's forced to betray the one he loves in order to save him. And you know, to me, that was what it was about. So after having watched it with them, you know, I said, well, what would you think about a warm kind of a score? And they were like, and I said, well, so you're thinking more like cold, like sort of, you know, more, you know, standoffish. And they said, and I think one of them said, well, how about neutral? Because, you know, they didn't really know exactly what they wanted. They hadn't thought about it, and they didn't want me coming in and totally changing their movie, you know, which, so I went off and found this. I listened to a lot of Irish themes. I thought the main characters you're watching are from the Irish gang, and found this thing called Limerick's Lamentation that I thought could be turned into an orchestral element. You know, I could imagine how it could be augmented, and so I did a quick sort of version of that, and just brought them in and played it for them. I don't remember which scene it was, but for one of these scenes, just played that idea for them. It was in fact going to be a sentimental Irish tune. And Gabriel Byrne, who has a stony expression through the entire film, the music kind of suggests that somewhere back in there is actually a person with feelings and, you know, maybe a sappy Irishman who gets drunk and cries. Anyway, they saw it immediately. We didn't really even have to discuss it after that. I played it for them and they said, yeah, okay, yeah, that's right. So that was it. But so that's how this one went. But it varies. Like on Raising Arizona, that yodeling theme is something that Joel knew from a Pete Seeger song. But when we looked at where Pete Seeger had gotten it, he'd gotten from a Sons of the Pioneers record. When we looked at the Sons of the Pioneers, they called it a folk tune. So the trail went dry then. But so a lot of these things, yes, they do in the end. They are actually folk tunes. Fargo, the same way. And there's something about...
Which one of you guys tied the Messing Around Suite to Ode to Joy? Because that's genius, really.
That's Pete. That's Pete, I think.
Pete did that.
I'm pretty sure Pete did that. Yeah,
You could have
that's
said I did.
Anyway, it was. There's something about the folk tunes. There's an authenticity and I don't know, earthiness to them that just happens to work really well with Joel and Ethan's films. And you know by now, by looking back on all their work, that they are in fact very much into folk music. But that's not why it's there. You know, maybe some way there's a connection, but there is something about it that's its humanity and it's just the fact that it survived for hundreds of years that makes a folk tune special. And so I don't know. It's not like that's our plan, but it just has happened to work in a number of these cases.
One of the things that I think is remarkably true about all the Coen Brothers films is that the casting decisions are fantastic and the performances are uniformly amazing. So can you talk a little bit about what your relationship is with a production sound recordist and the steps that they take to get those performances and capture them on set so that you don't have to do... I presume there's not a lot of ADR in Joel and Ethan's movies.
No, Peter and I worked on all of their movies. Carter has also worked on all of them. Actually, one of them only in spirit, but Peter started as the...
Are the three of you, that's the perfect attendance for the films?
Actually, Joel and Ethan didn't work on one of them, so we worked on more than they have. Peter was the boom man for the first few movies. Alan Beyer was the location mixer for the first three, I think. And then Peter jumped into the mixer seat, and he's mixed the rest of them. And we basically do, I try to visit the set, and I basically go and hang out with Peter and talk about things that we can do better. And we compare notes. We invite him to the mix. He doesn't always come because often he's working. But he comes to the mix, and we show him issues or things that we've done, in hopes of improving it collectively as we go. And we basically, the big thing for the Coen brothers is it's the Hippocratic oath of above all do no harm. So oftentimes the material is so well recorded and so interesting, and the way they work, all you're really trying to do is keep it up there in the front and not mess it up with a lot of other stuff. And we have this mantra that we have of getting a good recording for every single line in the script before they finish shooting. And they're pretty good about it. They've gradually grown more and more focused on that. So whenever something is happening, like for instance in No Country for Old Men, we actually had good recordings for every single line in the movie, with two exceptions. One was a line where Tommy Lee Jones was loading a horse into a trailer, and the horse footsteps coincided with one of the lines. And they said, that's okay, we like that. So we singled that out and we sent it to them and said, okay, are you good with this? Otherwise, go do it again. And they said, no, it's okay, we like the horse footsteps. So the other one was Javier had a pronunciation issue, which some people had flagged. And we actually did ADR for that line and put that in the movie. But otherwise, there's like a really, really big effort to get really good sounding recordings for every line of dialogue.
I want to talk about No Country just for a moment. We're running short on time, but I do want to touch on it. It's I thought that there was actually no music in it until the end title sequence. Famously, you know, the sort of that was the story that had come down. It was a completely musicless film, but that turns out not to be the case.
I think about 15 minutes maybe of score in the film. But it's right, you're not intended to perceive it.
So what is the nature of that music, and why was it important for it to be sort of in a stealth mode in that particular film?
Well, we actually came to that solution empirically. I think that Ethan always was dubious that there would be an instrumental score that worked. Joel wasn't sure, and he asked me to try some things. So I did try some different approaches, but it is true. But what happened, just as I say empirically, as soon as you heard something that sounded like music coming in, it actually lessened the tension in the film, and the film is all tension. And obviously there are traditions of how music can increase tension, but the film in its silent mode was basically the tension meter was at the max. And when music came in, all it did was it reminded you, oh, this is a film. And you would relax a little bit. We just all noticed it, that happened. So I eliminated different possibilities. What is causing this to happen? Like I tried just harmonics on violin, things like this, maybe would that work? But honestly, the moment you noticed it was music, you thought, oh, it's a film. And it just made you not as uncomfortable. It relaxed you in some way. So what the solution that I came up with in the end was to have what are called completely steady state sounds. They don't have a beginning and they don't have an end. Things like sine waves and these things called Tibetan singing bowls, these bowls that you do this with. And I would just fade them in, typically under wind or car sound. And we would pitch the wind and the car sounds and the music together, so you were not aware that something was there. The only reason we did it at all really was that Joel and Ethan would flag certain scenes. So we need a little something there. We need a little tension. We could boost it a little bit, or it needed to move. It was like there was something dramatically would happen, and we need a sense that the story has moved, but we don't have anything else that's going to tell us that. So the music would do it. But by intention, you never hear it enter. It's been designed so there's some times when you hear it go away, like the gas station scene where Javier flips a coin. Mm-hmm. At the moment he reveals the coin, the music stops, and only at that moment might you be aware that there was music going on. But it's designed in that way.
Interesting. So We're going to show, this is another one of my favorites. This is Burn After Reading. Again, another case of people who are not quite as smart as they think they are, and it all goes horribly wrong. So let's take a look at this scene. For those of you who haven't seen the film, the next scene after this, between the two of them, is a pure
Priceless.
genius. It's a fantastic scene. One of the things, Skip, that I've always admired about your work is it's not sound designed by the pound. It's very specific. It's very deliberate. The choices that you make and the sounds that you put in are all incredibly specific and just sit perfectly and feel perfect. There's so much to talk about in that sequence, but I included that last bits of walking down the various hallways in the CIA building because it just, to me, that's music. That's also that's score, but it's just, again, it's a perfect use of sound effects to tell a story. Can you talk a little bit about how that sequence came together and how you did that?
Well, like we talked about, many of those things were scripted, and the hallway sound. Actually, I'm not absolutely positive this is true, but I have a favorite film which I've been trying to get them to remake for a long time, and this movie may have been inspired by that idea, or I'm not sure. They wouldn't admit it, of course, anyway. But there's a lot of sort of '60s espionage stuff, and in those days, sound was more simple because the process was more cumbersome. So things tended to be kind of one thing played bold, writ large, as they say. And I really like that approach where you kind of choose one really good thing and present it and make it be as good as it can be. And we approach our work with the Coens that way from the very beginning. We've been down the wrong path quite a few times, but generally that idea really holds strong. And what Carter was saying about No Country for Old Men is a perfect example. Basically, that movie was an attempt to make a very, very scary movie with as few sounds as possible and still have it be a very interesting sounding movie. So with that in mind, Joel and Ethan are kind of like Mad Magazine when it comes to movie sound. They know all the key things, and whenever you can sneak in a reference to 2001, or in this case, The President's Analyst, there will be much space will be given and much thought will be given to those ideas. And that's one of the things that makes working with Joel and Ethan and Carter such a pleasure.
Great. One thing I wanted to ask you, Carter, about that sequence is it's a ridiculous movie. It's hilariously funny, completely over the top. Everybody is just behaving in a ridiculous manner, but it's a pretty earnest score. I mean, it's dramatic and is really taking its job very, very seriously. Could you talk a little bit about playing against expectations with music and striking tonal difference?
Well, in this case, it's, as you say, it's ridiculous and almost all of the characters are idiots. But they all believe themselves to be part of an international espionage drama, right? So basically, the vocabulary of the music is from their point of view. It is from the opening sequence, it's very earnest, very serious, bombastic. And in here, even when ridiculous things are going on, like going up and down the stairs, the bongos and things like that are part of the vocabulary of the '60s espionage, films, and so it's a bit more screwball here than in other parts of the film. But the music, it takes itself very seriously, and in a way, it's a tradition we might have begun around in Fargo, because the question was, and we actually did ask the question out loud. This film presents itself as a true crime drama, but we want people to be able to laugh. But we also want them to believe the murders are real. But we want that we don't want to dampen the possibility of them laughing. So how do you solve that problem musically?
Everything is a joke to them.
Anyway, the solution was, the music will not only take everything seriously, but take it too seriously. And the very fact that it takes it overly seriously then becomes a joke.
Right.
That worked here as well.
That's great. Well, we've got time. We're going to take some questions now from the audience. And you right there in the front row.
Oh.
They're going to give you a microphone.
Thank you so much. I actually just took a class in January at NYU on the Coen brothers, so I feel very educated, even more so now. My question is, how has working with the Coen brothers affected your other work outside of them? And especially for you, Carter, how does that affect your building of theme songs?
Well, in terms of the way that I work, I'm not sure how much it's affected me because, as I say, I try to take each film on its own terms. Every director actually works differently. I've not, it's just simply true. Every director that I work with works differently, and so I don't try to expect. I don't expect them to work the way Joel and Ethan do. And sometimes the way that directors will work may drive me nuts. They can't make decisions, or they make them in a different order than I would, or they're it's all, every film is different and every director is different. So I try not to bring any expectations. Joel and Ethan were the first people that I worked with. And when, after Blood Simple and Raising Arizona, when I started to work with other people, work in Hollywood, it was mostly disappointing to find out how things really work. Because, well, for one thing, Joel and Ethan, I say, are very honest, and they're completely frank with what's going on. They never play any kind of games, and
They're very rigorous also.
and they're very rigorous. They're there. If you go to a set, they are there before anybody else. You go at the recordings. They're there well before we begin. A lot of directors will show up later. They figure, okay, the composer's doing all this stuff. I don't have to be there. They're there from before it starts, and they're there after it ends. And same with the mix, I assume. They're very. It's strange to say, but workmanlike, and they show up at their office pretty much every day, whether they're working on a film or not. They'll write. They have this, it's their work is their life, and vice versa. And it's not as common in Los Angeles, honestly. I don't see it that much there. I've worked with some other directors who are like that. Sidney Lumet certainly is like that. I had the pleasure of working on his last film, but there are a lot of people also who are not that way. So I've learned not to bring an expectation from the way they work. In terms of when you said theme songs, do you mean like just thematic, like melodies and things like that? Again, I'd really try to avoid taking the way I work with them to other situations. Every film is different. And I've worked with Spike Jonze. He is a very different person than Joel and Ethan. Also a pleasure to work with, but just completely different. Or David O. Russell, or any of these people. And I try to just say, okay, I'm just going to go with that. I don't want to try to force my way of working on them. I'll learn something maybe by doing it their way. So I really try to not carry that baggage around.
Hi. First of all, thank you. It's very interesting. I have a question about Barton Fink. I feel that the sound in that movie, especially in the hotel scenes, is very, very unique. I was wondering if that was something that was mentioned in the script, and also how you work together to achieve that unique sound.
Well, you're right. It is very unique. And I think there was some of that in the script, right?
The discussion of the spaces was scripted, and it actually is written in several places what the sound would be like in those spaces. It was more like a framing for the sound, and the music really it operated independently of that, but there was a similar kind of lonely structure. It's the theme of their movie, I guess, their movies.
I mean, when they had shot it, Joel actually thought maybe they didn't need any music, that they would be entirely sound design. And I had an idea in my mind for what music might contribute. They were happy with the idea that maybe there wouldn't be any music. But I thought there was an aspect of Barton Fink's character, his childlike naivete, that I could enhance with a melody. So I proposed that to them. And again, the moment I played it for them, they said, oh yeah. And then that was it. But that was the first one, I think, where where Skip and I really spotted it very carefully together, because we really were trading sounds. There'd be times when I had these bass trombones, and Skip would have a mosquito. There'd be times when I'd have a violin, where's Mosquito had been, but now the hotel is creaking and groaning where the bass trombones had been. It was orchestrated between us. And actually when the album came out, they put some of Barton Fink on an album with Fargo. I put Skip's work on there too, on the album, because I just thought it was so integral to the score.
Yes.
You go.
I was just going to add to that, it was nice to be able to really work it out, because there were a lot of things where we couldn't really provide a deep enough sound effect, where we felt like we were getting close, but we really needed to sort of hand off. So we said, like, okay, well, this is getting us there for the mosquito, but it doesn't really hammer home. It's kind of empty, really. It's just one mosquito. We have to, what are we going to do? And we did the same thing in some of the other kind of more bizarre scenes where Carter was going along with a fairly open music cue, and we were able to put in splashes of kind of abstract sounds to push the whole thing a little farther.
So I'm actually really happy that you asked about Barton Fink. We could have easily have done the entire thing just about that one movie. There's so much to talk about. But if you want to know more about it, and actually in researching this, I came across there's a fantastic article written by a guy named Randall Barnes that was published a couple of years ago on
That was his thesis.
Yeah, but it's published on offscreen.com. And it's a very lengthy article just about Barton Fink, and it's just fascinating. Unfortunately, we're out of time. I want to thank Skip and Carter. They're working together right now, actually taking a break from, this is day 2 of the final mix on Jason Bateman's movie, which you're both working on. So they've literally, the stage stopped so that they could come down and talk to us today. So I really appreciate you guys coming down. Thanks. And thank you.